Back in 2006 there was one graphics card that truly ruled them all, the NVIDIA GeForce 8800 GTX. It didn't just feel powerful, it felt distant and untouchable, like something you could only dream about. This wasn't just another GPU, it was something dreamy. A brand new architecture and the first to truly embrace DirectX 10. It didn't just raise the bar, it actually set the bar. But before we drift into the games, let's take a closer look at what made this legend so unforgettable. Now, the card is paired with a 13900K, a Z790 motherboard and 64GB of DDR5 RAM. Yes, it's completely overkill, but that's exactly the point. This setup lets us see what this classic GPU can really do without anything holding it back. And by looking at the 8800 itself, back in 2006 it was built on NVIDIA's new unified shader architecture. It featured 128 shaders along with 768MB of GDDR3 memory. As for resolution, it can handle up to 2560 by 1600, and when it comes to outputs, well, things are a little bit different. There's no HDMI or DisplayPort. Instead you get two dual-link DVI ports, along with a TV out via S-Video. So yeah, by today's standards, it's pretty dated. But back in 2006 this thing was an absolute monster. Now, let's see it in action in a few games. The first game is Arkham Origins, running at 720p with low graphics settings and with depth of field and motion blur turned off. The GeForce 8800 GTX launched in late 2006, and it completely changed the game for graphics cards. It was the first to use something called unified shaders, which meant and handled graphics in a much smarter way. It was also the first card to support DirectX 10, which made games look much better than before, plus it was far more powerful than anything else on the market. So it then quickly became the top choice for gamers. Performance-wise in Arkham Origins, it's actually quite solid, especially considering this game came out several years after the 8800 GTX. On average it delivers 81 FPS, with a 1% low of 31 and a 0.1% low of 27 FPS. Up next is Assassin's Creed Revelations, running at 720p resolution on the medium graphics settings. When the 8800 GTX launched, it wasn't just powerful, it was also extremely expensive. In the United States it released for about $600. In the UK, prices were typically a bit higher once you factored in VAT and import costs. Exact launch pricing varied depending on the retailer, but it landed somewhere between the £400 and £450 mark. So while the 8800 GTX wasn't cheap, it set a new standard, not just for performance, but also for what people expected to pay for a top-tier graphics card. Assassin's Creed Revelations is another title that launched well after the 8800 GTX, which really highlights just how far ahead of its time this card actually was. In terms of performance, the average is 60 FPS, with a 1% low of 31 and a 0.1% low of 27 FPS. Up next we've got Bioshock Infinite, 720p resolution on medium graphics settings. One of the standout characteristics of this card was its power usage. It had a TDP of 155 watts. That might not sound like much today, but it was considered high usage for a graphics card in 2006. Most GPUs back then used a lot less power, so this was a big jump because of that. The 8800 GTX needed better cooling to keep temperatures under control, and a stronger power supply to run it properly. It even used two 6-pin power connectors, which in 2006 was not very common. So, for a lot of people, upgrading to this card also meant upgrading their power supply too. So, in Bioshock Infinite, performance is solid. On average you're looking at 55 FPS with a 1% low of 34, and the 0.1% lows are dropping to 23 FPS. Now, can it actually run Crysis? Running at 720p resolution and with medium graphics settings. So, here we are 20 years later, running Crysis on the original 768MB 8800 GTX. The same graphics card that had everyone stressing about their power supplies back in 2006. And honestly, looking at it now really puts things into perspective. The visuals show just how far gaming has come over the years. As for performance, well, it's got that old school charm. It dips a little here and there, but it just keeps pushing through. Watching it run today is kind of amazing. It's still completely playable, and for a card that's been around this long, that's seriously impressive. It really reminds you why it became such an icon. It's not just old hardware, it's a piece of history, and the fact that it's still holding on, well, there's something pretty special about that. As for numbers in Crysis, it averages 66 FPS, with a 1% low of 46 and a 0.1% low dropping to 32 FPS. Next up is Fallout 3, running at 720p, but this time on the high graphics settings, with depth of field turned off. So, if you're into retro PC gaming, the 8800 GTX was basically perfect for running Windows XP or Vista. It handles classic titles well. We're talking games like Half-Life 2, Oblivion, and yes, even Crysis, on medium-ish settings without too much trouble. So, if you're putting together a retro PC in 2026, then this card is honestly kind of the sweet spot. Iconic, powerful, and still more than capable. The 8800 GTX, it's a true legend of its time. Take Fallout 3 for example. The game averages 82 FPS, with a 1% low of 42 and a 0.1% low of 19 FPS. Next is Mafia 2, the classic version available on Steam. Today we're running it at 720p resolution on the medium graphics settings. Now, when it comes to modern games, this is where things start to fall apart a bit. Apart from the limited VRAM, the 8800 GTX only supports DirectX feature level 10, which means a lot of newer titles just aren't compatible. Most modern games expect DirectX 11, DirectX 12, or even Vulkan just to run properly. So what happens? Some games won't even launch at all, and the ones that do, you're often looking at single-digit frame rates. So while this card is amazing for its time, it's definitely not built for today's gaming needs. Performance-wise in Mafia 2, the game averages 53 FPS, with a 1% low of 37 and a 0.1% low of 27 FPS. Next up is Portal 2, this time running at 1080p and on high graphics settings. So, here's the deal with this card. Driver support is basically dead. NVIDIA hasn't touched the 8800 GTX in years. So, no updates, no bug fixes, no performance tweaks, nothing at all. It's just frozen in time. So when you try and run it on modern systems, problems start to pop up. The smart move if you want to tinker with these old cards is to set up a system using something like Windows 7, so you can run it the way it was meant to be. Without active driver support, the experience becomes unpredictable at best. And yes, and sometimes damn right frustrating. The 8800 GTX is still an iconic card, classic in gaming history. Today though, it's more of a collector's piece than something you'd depend on for daily use. In Portal 2, at 1080p, the game actually averages 60 FPS, with a 1% low of 40 and a 0.1% low of 36 FPS. The next game is Singularity, running at 720p on high settings with depth of field turned off. Now, when it comes to using the 8800 GTX as a media server, it really is absolutely useless, and there's a pretty clear reason why. It just doesn't support modern codecs like H.265, also known as HEVC, and there's no AV1 support at all. Media servers rely heavily on fast video encoding and decoding, especially if you're streaming to multiple devices or doing real-time transcoding without proper GPU support. The CPU has to take over completely, and that quickly becomes a bottleneck. That means more power usage, more heat, and a noticeable drop in performance when the system is under load. So if you're trying to stream or watch high-quality video, the experience isn't great. You'll likely run into buffering, drop frames, playback issues, and sometimes the video format just won't work. At that point, it stops being a practical solution even for a basic home server. Gaming though, That's a different story. In Singularity, it averages 77 FPS, with a 1% low of 51 and a 0.1% low of 44 FPS. Up next is Team Fortress 2, 720p resolution with motion blur and 4x MSA enabled. Modern games aren't just demanding, they are built with features like upscaling right in. DLSS, for example, uses AI on newer GPUs to boost performance and make visuals look sharper. That means you're stuck running games at lower resolutions and settings just to get anything playable. And it gets worse, because modern games are becoming more reliant on ray tracing. The 8800 GTX doesn't support ray tracing at all either, so you're missing out on that completely too. At this point, it's not just about lower settings, it's that the hardware simply isn't built for how games are made today. And even 20 years later though, this card can still deliver a decent performance in a number of popular online games. In Team Fortress 2, it averages 143 FPS, with a 1% low of 89 and a 0.1% low of 57 FPS. The final game is Tomb Raider, running at 720p on high graphics settings, with motion blur turned off and FXAA enabled. Performance averages a solid 90 FPS, with a 1% low of 41 and a 0.1% low of 22 FPS. So there you have it, the NVIDIA GeForce 8800 GTX. Looking back, it's clear why this card wasn't just a product launch. It was a revolution. In 2006, it completely redefined what gamers could expect from graphics. It set a new benchmark for performance, power and ambition. Watching it run classics like Arkham Origins, Fallout 3 or even Crysis today, there's a certain magic in seeing a piece of hardware that's now 20 years old and still rocking in some small way. Sure, by modern standards it can't touch the newest GPUs, and driver support has long since ended, but that's part of what makes it special. It's a snapshot of a pivotal moment in PC gaming history, a reminder of the leaps and bounds technology has taken, and the passion that drove gamers to chase the best experience possible. So, the next time you fire up an old favourite and marvel at those early DirectX 10 visuals, just remember, this little powerhouse once ruled the gaming world, and for that, it will always be king. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this nostalgic look back at the NVIDIA GeForce 8800 GTX, then don't forget to like and subscribe. I'm David James, and I will hopefully see you in the next one.